Welcome, Marcus.
Hello.
Marcus is one of the world's leading experts on C.G. Jung. He's basically one of the few people who has taken upon himself to read almost every writing or every single book of C.G. Jung.
Yeah. And I have to correct you there. It's not almost. I read every single one, and that's a lot of them.
and is it like only books or even like all the letters and all those writings that he did in lectures?
Yeah, the funny thing about Jung is he lived a very long life, a very productive life, and he has really written a lot of books, seminars, letters, and luckily there's really an incredible amount of just his works available. It's sometimes tough to get them. Sometimes they're also quite pricey, but yeah, you can get really a lot. So everything that's commercially available, I read, and this is the last time I checked 57 books.
What was the main motivation that got you into this project?
It started with a video that I saw on YouTube, and it was about Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks has a secret passion. He really likes typewriters. So he regularly comes to Europe, especially like Germany and Austria and so on, to buy antique typewriters. And when he was traveling around in Switzerland, he got a letter from the Jung family that said they want to show him something very special, like a family secret. And that thing was the Red Book. And the Red Book, for those who are unfamiliar with Jung, is a very personal book where he wrote down his dreams and fantasies and so on that he had, while also elaborating on them psychologically. And he did not want this to be published. He told close to no one about it when he worked on that. But then, of course, when it's Tom Hanks on YouTube talking about it, that was around the time when they published it. That was, I think, 2011. And I heard about that, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Somebody goes in his psyche and tries to record what they're seeing there, experiencing there. This was also around World War I. And I bought it, tried to read it, and failed miserably. So after a couple of years, I tried again, because luckily also through YouTube, I got in contact more with psychology, and also through John Peterson, who made a lot of Jungian concepts very approachable. I said, okay, I will try again. So I took the book out of my bookshelf again and tried to read it. And I thought at the end, okay, maybe I got half. And this is when I said, okay, I really want to read his works, his collected works. And I started by reading 20 pages a day, which is a lot of pages a year. And I read then over 3.5 years. So yeah, 10,000 of pages.
You must have been taking notes excessively, because even 20 pages often contains so much.
Yeah.
And then like to make sense of it all, to put it all together, the way you also presented in your podcast, where you're like able to give a quote on every topic and find the right. How did you manage to keep track of all that information? Did you put sticky notes into every page? How did you do that?
I had a highlighter, so I used several highlighters then over the years, because I would just use them up, and I would just mark and highlight things that I thought, okay, this sounds profound, or I can understand that. So I was a little bit, I'm comparing it to like sifting through gold. Like when you want to have gold, you take a huge mass of earth and just run it through a sluice and then have this very fine grains. But if you all get together, then you have pure gold, and an ingot of gold. And I had roughly 5 or 5,500 quotes that had then also typed out.
So you always stopped and typed them out, or did you read digitally?
I read the book, because it was already reading them was hard enough. So I read, and everything that spoke to me, also on a personal level, I highlighted, and then on a separate occasion, I would then type it down and say like, oh yeah, that sounds very good. And yeah, I would then collect it. I would put it into a Notion, which is a very nice program if you want to build a personal wiki. And also I would tag them for specific topics. And they have then like my own Jung wiki with the quotes and references from which books. And yeah, this, as you mentioned, I have a podcast and I have a meetup group. And when I do the presentations there, I draw from that. So it's really 100% Jung with really the reference if it's needed. And this is how I think I can provide something that you can get close to nowhere else, because I can promise you very few people read all the books because it takes so much time.
Absolutely. The meetup group is called CG Jung Helpdesk.
Yes.
And that's also how I actually found out about you. That's the first time I kind of got to know you. I came to that meetup, found out that there was some real gold that you had distilled there, and I found very interesting. Came to 2 or 3 meetups, and then I think I reached out at some point. How does it feel for you to have your own work, your personal brand in a way, so connected to this one other person, right? For me, it's kind of not easy to imagine that, because I do work on certain topics. Yes. For me, confidence is a big topic, and social skills, and I read everything from all kinds of different authors. I wonder how it feels to kind of have this one figure instead, and does it sometimes also feel like you're restricted in a way because you're under the shadow of this one thinker, and almost becomes like a master or a spiritual like guide for everything, and he has written about everything. So how does that feel for you to have this?
Actually, I was very glad about that, because I'm rather, let's say, a shy person, especially back then. So the helpdesk and the meetup group helped me with that, but for me, it was always about Jung, and I had no problem making about Jung and saying, okay, this is stuff that he said and thought. But with time, I realized that more and more people are also coming just for me and the stories that I then tell, and the personal note for me. So I always said, okay, it is Jung's words, I'm just saying them, but people also gave me the feedback and said, yeah, but it's like you assembled them, you're presenting them, and you said the topics and all these different things. So there is something from me inside there, but my main goal is, of course, to help people to understand Jung, because I find it very, let's say, valuable and very interesting idea. It's a very, very interesting way to see the world, experience the world, and trying to understand the world. And for me, it's also, I want to understand Jung. And now I can do this with an audience, which is amazing, because the best way how to learn something is trying to teach it. And it's super cool that people really respond to that.
In the shortest way possible, what would you say is the reason why Jung is so special? Why is Jung so interesting and different, and someone where you say, I can just focus all my work on this one person? What makes him so special?
I would say there's 2 reasons. One is he was very, very open. So for him, really, every human experience was important and worth listening to and worth thinking about. So he branched out into really a lot of topics. It was not only psychology and psychotherapy, but it was also history or astrology, and also occultism and spirituality and religion, mythology, all these different topics. And he took them very, very seriously. So what you find, and I also find that out, depending on the topic that you're talking about, you will draw a completely different crowd, but Jung still speaks to them because he takes them seriously. And this is why I think Jung is so successful, because he takes it seriously, but also I think he hit there something about the basics of the human psyche and structure. This was his goal. He really wanted to understand human psychology and how the psyche works and what it does and how it connects to a lot of things. And I think he hit there a bedrock, let's say. So I guess when you as an individual person start digging in your own psyche, you will come past these points where Jung also already was, and wrote them down and formalized them. So I think it speaks to people because they can connect it to their own experiences. And I think this is then something not completely abstract, that's only intellectual, but let's say there's a lot of blood and also heart in there. And this is then what speaks to people.
I would agree. I think the fact that he's open to these a little bit less scientific, a little bit less, technical and empirical sides of the human experience makes him very special and very different from everyone else who claims that they're an expert. Because when you're an expert, you're usually forced to provide data and to provide like scientific frameworks. And Jung is one of those thinkers, it seems, who says, you can't really grasp the human psyche with science and rationality alone. So he's really open to that mystical side of things. But that, I guess, might also be a big critique against Jung, because probably a lot of people, I'm not sure, would say, it's not scientifically provable. These theories are almost like literature, like it's a lot of stories, a lot of anecdotes. like, what's your knowledge on the tests that have been done to prove or disprove Jungian psychotherapy?
That's a very good question. So Jung's approach, he saw himself as a scientist, and specifically as an empiricist. That means he really tried to see and also categorize things that people experience. So people experience ghosts, for example, and then, okay, why could it be that people experience ghosts? And he tried to find their commonalities and tried to understand where this is coming from. And he was there really, I would say, not necessarily providing data so much. He did this in the beginning where he really had some nice experiments like the association experiment to map and track what's happening in the psyche. But like other stuff, he gathers, let's say, a lot of information and then tries to find patterns. It's more similar to literature research, comparatistic, when you really say, okay, you have different works, and through their commonalities, you find a kind of pattern where you say, oh, this is, for example, a romantic novel or a naturalistic novel or something like that. Do you have this more in art where you really say, okay, there are certain motifs or images or topics that are very zeitgeist-like, right? So he would try to get that and point to something. But it's a little bit more thought experiments, a little bit like Einstein. Like Einstein did not prove any of his hypotheses outside of the, let's say, formulas and thoughts. It was then for other people that came after him to prove actually that Einstein is always right. Otherwise, we would not have satellite communication and other things.
Do you think that there will be a test devised in the future that proves the existence of an anima, for example?
I think, in a sense, there already is. I think we have now different words for that. This is something, I would say, that makes it a little bit difficult to read Jung, because we are way further now with psychological terms and psychological understanding. So he kind of describes certain concepts that are now more easily available to us. So to say, okay, to scientifically directly prove an anima, I think this is pretty difficult, but like the, let's say, emotional reactions that people have that can be mapped on the experience that he described as the anima. Like he was there very open. He said he's using terms for certain patterns that he noticed. It does not mean that it's only this thing, and he says it's likely not the end of it. He compared himself and his colleagues like Freud and Adler to people who have been to a continent for the first time. So everything is new. You have new animals, you have new plants, and you're, let's say, overwhelmed in the beginning. And he said for him, it's just to get there and look around, see what he sees, and describing that to the people back home. But he says it will be the people following him that will, like, let's say, settle there and be more than precise in their investigations.
For me, this continent that he's going to, studying consciousness and studying unconsciousness as well, for me, with my layman's perspective, it seems like something that you cannot fully understand. So you are talking about how he's trying to understand the human psyche and how you're trying to understand Jung. And whenever that word understand comes up, I always feel like, I think Jung is something that you cannot fully understand because it's not fully logical, because it's not fully rational, right? He even talks about that himself all the time, where he's like the shadow and the unconscious and the irrational. Those are things that we cannot really grasp with our minds.
Yeah.
So I wonder, is it even worth trying to understand it and really making sense of it all? Or is it more something that you should read just like literature?
I think there's like a specific way how people get to Jung. Because Jung you cannot really approach intellectually. If you really sit down and you read a book from Jung and say, like, it sounds all very, very complicated and confusing. Why is it like that? You have other theories, for example, Freud, with his structure of the psyche. It's, let's say, more easily understandable because you have very clear structures and you have very clear relationships between them. And for Jung, it's more like a network of ideas. But I think that the human psyche is pretty messy. So if you want to understand and learn Jung, I think coming from a completely intellectual perspective will be very, very hard. And I would even say it's not even worthwhile. It's more for people, they had certain experiences. This is a realization that I had about my meetup group. The people who are coming there, very often they're on a kind of journey. They had some kind of experience, something happened to them, and they try to make sense of it. So they kind of scour the earth and go everywhere to understand it better because they have an image or feeling and emotion that they're trying to process. And I think Jung helps there because he hit something there in the basic structure of the psyche. And then people can really identify with that, what he's writing about, and say, like, oh yeah, I see myself in there. But I think it first happens with this experience, and Jung helps them with that.
It seems like it also attracts a lot of creative people. And me and you, we are also creators in that sense that we're creating content, putting a podcast out, putting a lot of videos out. For me, I think I somehow feel understood by Jung because he also even prescribes this as a kind of path out of confusion to just create and intuitively, especially I think I heard that in one of your podcasts in your 30s when you hit that kind of point where you're like in the midlife crisis and you're not sure what to even do for the rest of your life and what you did. And the solution for Jung, it seems like, was just go outside and create something. Yes. And he did that himself as well, right?
He did that himself. That's a super interesting point. This, again, is something today, midlife crisis, we understand what that means, right? And Jung talked about this a lot, but he called it more like midpoint shift or midpoint of life, where he says there's something completely different happening psychologically. He came from a very psychoanalytic background because psychoanalysis came up back then, and it helped really a lot to explain about the psyche. And he also worked with Freud a long time. And psychoanalysis, Jung noticed, works amazingly well for people until a certain age. Because the basis of psychoanalysis is people are still caught in the psychology of their parents, and they need to kind of go out. Like Freud drags people out of the basement of their parents into the world. And Jung used that, of course, he was a therapist, and he realized when people are beyond a certain age, it does not work anymore. And this is where he came up with his own branch of psychology, analytical psychology, where he would try to familiarize people more with what's happening within their psyche. And one way was drawing, for example, where he would say, okay, it's not important what you draw. It's not important how good it is. Just do what you feel, let's say. And the experience that he describes there is that people would realize, oh, I've drawn something. It wasn't my intention. It just came out. So something was acting through me, creating something. And now this is, I think, something that creative people can very, very much identify with, that yes, you can have a plan, but it turns out completely different. And Jung talks about this, like this autonomous factor of the psyche, this creative factor that is acting through people. And it's not really, let's say, given through consciousness by conscious plans and so on. If you do it like only consciousness, very often it turns out bad. But if it comes really from the heart, then it speaks to people. This is then also what resonates for people, because it's not only coming from a deep level of the creator, of the artist, but it touches then also the deep parts of the psyche of the audience experiencing it.
Do you think that he himself also thought of himself as a artist in a way, or a creator like that?
Well, in the Red Book, he drew a lot. He made some really, really beautiful pictures, and he did their hand lettering, so it looks a little bit like a Bible, a Gutenberg Bible. And interestingly enough, when he investigated his own psyche and he encountered his soul, his anima, He said for a time he became very convinced that he should become an artist. But then he said, okay, I guess it's my anima playing tricks on me. And he said there has to be kind of this distinguishment, like there's very things that are personal for you and your personal development, and they have to you have to keep them for yourself. Like it's not necessarily for the outside world, it's for you to experience. And he had this example of a patient of his who had a factory. He made dishes, so plates and cups and so on. And he also hit his midpoint in life, and he became very convinced that he should be an artist. So he made those very artistic and then very colorful with patterns and all these things, and had this huge factory producing this stuff. And he basically went bankrupt because nobody wanted to have it. So this is where you have to be careful, kind of what the psyche is telling you. And I think this is also a very common experience, that you have certain drives, ideas, and so on, where then realize, maybe that's not the best idea. Like the drive to scroll Instagram 24 hours a day. And it's like, maybe I should not listen to that.
I have the drive to make Instagram videos, and oftentimes those videos are kind of pointless. And I obviously talk about topics that, are relevant to my business and to my coaching practice. But sometimes I also just make a video that just feels like I need to get rid of that thought. It's just something I need to put out in the world. And then it feels so good. But I think I can identify with this guy who almost bankrupted his business because he just followed that, passion and never really thought about economics. One thing also that strikes me as a content creator is that often the videos that get the most reach are those that have a little bit of that shadow factor, where, you talk about things that are not talked about usually. My whole business is kind of built around that idea, where I talk about certain psychological forces that exist out in the world that are very unpleasant to talk about. And I'm one of the few people who just says, let's just bring it out. But I wonder how much of the shadow sides, of the dark sides, you can actually show publicly, because by definition, right, the shadow is the stuff that you don't really want to even look at, and that you might not even be fully aware of. So I guess the shadow kind of accidentally enters my content, and maybe your content as well. Do you think it's a good idea as a creator or as an artist to say, let me integrate my shadow into my work, let me show my shadow through my work?
That's a very good question. And I had several ideas when I had this. One is, Jung has this idea of the persona, where he says, we wear a social mask in public. And he said, this is like a form of politeness, right? You don't try to overbear the other person with your whole psychology and all your problems, right? You have a kind of designed appearance. I think this is also something that is way more familiar to modern people, because we have profiles on the internet where we show like all the good stuff and all the bad stuff we live out. So it's, let's say, to put your shadow out there is to make yourself vulnerable, and also possibly being too much for other people. But at the same time, it's kind of, when you're oblivious to your own shadow, it will get out totally. So this is actually what Jung says about people. Like, when you want to know your shadow, just ask other people. Ask your parents. Ask your partner what's wrong with you. Like, you will learn a lot of stuff then about yourself. And but this question, okay, should creators interact with their shadow? And I would say 100%, because what is the shadow? The Jungian concept for shadow is you have a consciousness, right? This is you, and this is how you're adapted to the world. You're socialized in a certain world, you were raised a certain way, you learned certain patterns, and you develop certain skills. And this is always very focused and a part of you. But the psyche is then way bigger than that. And what Jung says is the psyche kind of comes knocking, trying to remind you that you're more than your narrow focus. Let's say you think you're only your persona, you're only the role that you fill out in society, the title that you have. The psyche will remind you through different ways that you are more than that, you're a complete human being. So there are some very famous creators who interacted with their shadow, that brought out their shadow, that tried to understand it. For example, the author of 48 Laws of Power, that guy was a pushover. He was a complete tool. He had no success in his career.
Yeah.
He said he was struggling a lot. Like, he was working like crazy. He never got any recognition. He never got promoted. And it happened not only in one company, but several companies. Until one day where he said, why? Why is that? And this is when he started to pay attention. And this is what consciousness can do very well. It's like this then, okay, I will now investigate. I will pay attention. And suddenly all these patterns became clear to him, that there are certain things that people were doing that were very good for him, for them, but not good for him. And this is when he wrote this book. And this is how he, let's say, confronted his shadow, tried to understand it. And now he's very famous for that. Also, David Goggins, right? He weighed like 300 pounds and did not move and felt horrible, and everything about him, his health was in an absolute horrendous state. And he said one day, I don't want to be like that anymore. And he started running, and now he runs a marathon a day, I think. He's absolutely crazy. And this is then his shadow. So people have to look into what is the opposite of me. And what is very difficult for me, what is negatively, emotionally laden, which is this dark valley. And the good thing about Jung is, and I find that very hopeful, that he says, there's something lying on the other side. There's kind of, most people only see the dragon, right? And Jung says, there's actually dragon treasure behind the dragon. So Jung says shadow integration, confronting a shadow, is doing the things that are very difficult for you and that need to be kind of overcome. You have an emotion, it weighs down on you, and you need to kind of deal with it. And one way is shying away, the other way is confronting it. And if you confront it, then there's where all psychological development is happening. So this is like a very condensed version of like shadow and shadow work is about.
Right. So I guess then when, as a creator, you confront your own shadow and kind of look behind the dragon, find the treasure, and then somehow share that with the world, a lot of people resonate, because probably a lot of people have similar dragons, because we have this collective unconscious. So we're kind of connected in that way. And few people have the courage to look at those dragons. So when, as an artist, you do that, a lot of people feel like, oh my God, yes. Inside, they can feel like almost he did it for me.
Yes.
Interesting. How do you do that yourself? Or do you feel like you do that yourself in your creations?
I would say so. I really try to, let's say, listen more to that. I think when you talk about tough topics, this is something that you mentioned, right? People can connect with that. So for example, like last year I went through a pretty rough breakup, and I was there very thankful to get a lot of support from my friends and families and work colleagues and even acquaintances. And I realized like, everybody had that experience. Everybody had an absolutely horrible breakup that put them through psychological trouble. So when you talk with people about that, it becomes a very raw, very honest discussion. And I really had there some relationships with people that I already had for a very long time that reached a new depth through that, because you put there something out that's hurtful and painful, and you kind of deal with it. And then you find out that people kind of try to help you also, because they know what it's like. They say, it took me 5 years to get over that. So they want to be there, they want to support, and it's then very nice to experience all that humanity. And this is because you go out, you don't shut in and try to cut out, but rather you really try to connect with people and talk with them. Like, this is what I did. I just talked to every single person I met. I talked to my barber. So it is, in that sense, very helpful to confront those negative emotions. And they're very often on the shadow side.
Does Jung himself also talk about his negative shadow emotions, all the stuff that, feels a little bit vulnerable and maybe embarrassing as well? Does he talk about that stuff in his books? Because I heard that he does have also a bit of a not super clean personal life, let's say.
Well, Jung is a little bit famous for that he had multiple affairs outside of his marriage.
With patients as well?
With patients, which was back then not such a big problem. So it was the beginning of psychology as a field and also psychotherapy. Of course, today it's I don't know, like I'm not a psychotherapist, but I'm pretty sure that's not how we do it today anymore. But it is there one thing where he does not talk about in his books. Of course, he does not talk about his affairs, but like interestingly about his affairs, they were all very smart, capable women, and they helped him a lot with his theories also. And they were also like long-term relationships that were also known to his wife. Like when I heard that, I also thought, that does not sound so good, to be honest. But on the other side, at one point, somebody pointed out, yeah, they're all adults. And if everybody knew and everybody agreed, it's fine. But also at the same time, 100 years ago, like the relationship between men and women was a little bit different. So this is something he does not talk about. Also, he does not mention when it was really input from these very close relationships he had from Toni Wolff, for example, or Sabina Spielrein. So he does not confront his shadow so much in these academic works. I think this is then more for when you have a biography on him, where people try really to look at his life. But yeah, I would say his works are shadow-free in regarding to his own personal life.
And he makes it clear that there are certain things that you don't need to share with the world, and that are better if you do them for yourself and keep them.
Yes, like the Red Book. This is why I said he has a very strong concern that he would lose his credibility as a scientist, as a researcher. He was already dealing with a lot of fringe topics, but he said, okay, that's maybe just too much. Also because he said he does not completely understand it himself. It's a kind of elaboration. He tries really to understand it. And that's really nice because you can buy the black books, which are the original texts. This is from his dreams and so on, and his active imaginations. And then you have the red books where you then really have the psychological investigation into those images and situations that he was in. So, but then again, the Red Book came out, and a lot of people find Jung through the Red Book, because this is then again something highly personal and very, deep, emotional, and raw. Like when you read the Red Book, it touches you a bit because it's a little bit like reading dreams. It's between science and art. It's a really weird book and weird experience to read it. And most people read it first. And if they do not get discouraged because it is confusing, if you have no idea what he's trying to get at, it's because it's also confusing to him. So it's amazing book. But I would say similar with the experiences you had when you put something personal out there, that there can be very, very high reward, at least in the immediate relationships that you have around you.
Absolutely. And did you say he didn't even want those red books to be shared?
Yes.
Wow. And those are the ones that actually got him quite a lot of fame.
Yes. So this is that's a kind of Jung renaissance happening since the early 2010s. This also has to do with the Philemon Foundation. So you have the collected works. They got already published during his lifetimes. Those are books he written or like essays and even introductions to certain books, the foreword. Just as a big collection. But the Philemon Foundation, they're focusing very much on the seminars, and it's pretty cool because they are assembling them from the notes of different people that participated. Sometimes they were not allowed to take notes, but of course they took notes because Jung was speaking. And there's this super cool story where people wrote it in shorthand. And you had that back then also in courts, but shorthands is also something very individual. So they had to find people who could still read it because they had the notes, but they were in shorthand and nobody could read them. So they gathered people that were already in their 80s and 90s to decipher what the shorthand is around. And you can buy now those books, and they're really, really insightful. So when people try to read Jung, I would always recommend the seminars. When you get your hands on any book which has dream in the title, like children's dreams or dream symbols of the individuation process, this is very good introductions.
Interesting, because somehow I got told that Man and His Symbols is a very accessible first read. So that's how I started.
Yeah.
Already that was quite something for me. Didn't remember much of it, to be honest. But you say those Dreams books are better as a starter.
Well, I guess you will be confused anyways, no matter where you start, but it's a little bit easier with the seminars. I would say the toughest point to start is alchemy. When he talks about alchemy, it's very dry and very confusing. But there's a really cool story about memories, the Man and His Symbols, because when he was already in a very advanced age, he had a dream. He had a dream that he's standing on a stage and he was talking about his theories and his works and so on. And he thought he's talking to his scientific colleagues. And suddenly the light went on and he could see the audience. And it was just normal people from the street, from the store, from the train station. And he woke up and he said, oh, I have to write a book for the layperson. I have to make it approachable. So this is a very good place to start, Man and His Symbols. And so he gathered his closest students and said, okay, everybody's writing a chapter. And he wrote the first 100 pages and Marie-Louis from France wrote a chapter and so on. And when he finished his part, his 100 pages, 2 weeks later, he died.
Wow.
So it was his psyche telling him, Carl, time to wrap it up.
Gotta get this one last thing done.
So he really wrote till the very end of his life. And it's then again interesting that this is the last work he did. Yeah. And this is now what is recommended to start with his works, like the very last.
That's insane. Do you think if Carl Jung was still alive, he would have a YouTube channel, Instagram? Because that's the way to reach the masses now, right?
He would be horrified. So there's some stuff you have to keep in mind. Like Jung was a Swiss guy from over 100 years ago. He was born in 1875 in central Switzerland. So it's kind of fun when he's complaining about modern art or modern music, like he's complaining about swing. Mm-hmm. And so some things where we would say, oh, this is now like very classy. And he's like, like one concern he had about modernity and like the modern state of mind, he said, we're very much removed from nature in a sense of, and also removed from our bodies, that we're very abstract, very much in our head. We're kind of like flying away with our intellect, not being connected to the earth. And this is from a time where people don't even have telephones, right? So no internet, no TV. They had maybe newspapers. And he's already, people are not close enough to nature. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure that everybody had indoor plumbing and electricity and so on. So maybe that already. But so I think he's seeing us now with the internet where it's ultra abstract and completely in the air. And people, let's say, only sit inside. I think he would see himself confirmed in his hypotheses where things are going, but at the same time he would say like, But then again, you have this interesting thing that he kind of anticipated that people want to explore the body more and rediscover the bodily. So you have this now that people, for example, they go to the gym or they do a lot of sports outside or they go sailing like you did recently. So they want to experience really nature as it is, and they want to experience their body and they pay more attention to the body. And it also opened up then a little bit sense. So also you have online pornography, which is like only about the body and very primal, very instinctively. And he would say, okay, that's not necessarily a coincidence that these are all signs, like a psychological need of our times needs to be filled. And this is why then people are now very, very much also concerned about their body, not only on a persona side, but also on a health side.
So Jung would probably say, read my book, but not too much. Read like whatever you need and then go out and actually experience grass.
Yeah, this was his general approach. So he was really there to help people that are kind of in a hole, to help them out. So he saw himself as a doctor, right? And when you go to a doctor, let's say you break your leg, when you come to the doctor, you would not expect the doctor to say, I will make you the fastest person in the world. You will beat Usain Bolt and all of those guys, like they will have no chance. You expect him to say, and very likely he will say, okay, I will help you that you can walk again. so that you can live your normal life. And Jung was the same way. He had people who could not live their normal lives because they had psychological problems. And he would try to give them the tools and the understanding that they could participate in life again. So yeah, he would say, okay, when you read something, read it what helps you, and otherwise just like Jung is more break in the case of emergency. So when you need something because you cannot really understand it, you only feel it, Jung can help there.
That actually brings me to another question, which is the end of therapy. I had my first real therapy last year, actually. And it was a bit hard to get out of it because once you start thinking about all the stuff that might be down there, you find more and more and more. And I wonder how Jungian psychoanalysis sees this. What you just said sounds like you just kind of fix the problem, make sure he kind of functions again, the person can go out in the world, and then end the therapy. But I think when you start thinking about all these really deep, complex things, you can keep going forever.
Oh, yes.
Right? Yeah. And so how do you draw the line? I mean, maybe from a Jungian perspective, but also from your own perspective.
That's a very interesting question, because I try to think of where he said where the logical end is. I think for him, the logical end was when like the symptoms stopped for people, especially when it was about obsessive thoughts, that they were really caught by an emotion or thought. Once that was gone, he saw the therapy as successful. And but he does not give like a clear cut. And yeah, it is, I think, a little bit of a danger. He also said that his patients, when they come to therapy, they're all convinced they should become therapists and psychologists. Yes. And because you discover that things about yourself, right? You have these eureka moments. You find your own new continent. And say, oh, look at all the cool stuff that's laying around here. And I think, you can really get lost of that and then only be in your head. And this is then also a not so positive thing. But in the end, I would say it's really the question, how well you function in your normal life and whether that something is hindering you. That is like the definition of an addiction or pathology, right? So when your personal life suffers, like your personal relationships and your work and your health and all these different things, I think, okay, yeah, that's maybe too much. But otherwise, he says there are certain personality types, right, that are just really, really interested in the psyche. And he called those people introverts. And the term introversion and extroversion is actually coming from him. Yeah. He coined those terms. He used them a little bit differently because for him it's very much, okay, is someone oriented outside in the world and kind of ignores their psyche, or is someone very much focused on their psyche and is ignoring the world? Then again, you have this shadow relationship. The one that only looks outside should really look inside, and the other way around also. So it's not, let's say, unusual to be interested in one's psychology when you're an introvert, for example.
Yeah. I would also say that most psychologists probably came to that idea because they started working on themselves and started discovering this new continent and started seeing that there's this black hole and an infinite rabbit hole that you can have a lot of revelations in. But it seems to me that it's a never-ending story. And I think that's also probably the reason that the alternative to Gnosticism, which is kind of what Jung proposes or is part of in a way, is not even trying to understand and not saying that, you need knowledge and you need to look at all of that and understand all of that, but rather, I'm not sure what the alternative is, rather accept that there is this psyche which is infinitely complex, which you can never fully understand as a human because it's kind of below consciousness, and we only have consciousness to look at the world, and so we cannot look at consciousness itself. Would you agree that is kind of the alternative view?
I would say that's something that he would propose. He talked a lot about irrationality, not negatively, but also as a precursor. He says consciousness is adapted. It's a kind of rules, a kind of structure, a kind of system. In itself, it is coherent, but it does not mean that you're adapted enough to the world. Like the world is more messy than your understanding of it is. And he said it's integral when you want to grow to be, let's say, open to irrationality, meaning things you do not understand. And he has this interesting example where he says, okay, if you go out in the forest and like suddenly the frogs start talking to you and you wish them a good day and just carry on, then like everything is fine. You have a splendid day. But if you start like freaking out and trying to understand it, you can fall in a kind of rabbit hole regarding that. So it is with Jung a lot about humility and being humble. It's about realizing that you're limited and that you don't know everything, even though that very much feels like it. He says you should be open to doubt, that you're wrong and that you don't know everything about yourself, about the world. And this automatically opens you up. When you say, oh, I know everything and it's like that, and I don't accept any other explanations or viewpoints, you're in your consciousness very sterile. There will nothing happen. But at the same time, again, the psyche will try to remind you that you're more and the world is more and the psyche is more, and will try knocking on you and try to trip you so that you become aware of all these things, right? That the frogs are talking.
I see. So Gnosticism, the way you often use it in your podcast episodes, where it kind of means knowing, I think that's where the word comes from,
gnosis,
right?
Yes.
Gnosis is not knowing everything, or doesn't mean you have to know and understand everything.
No, it's like Gnosticism. Jung was really interested in that because, again, I think it spoke to him very much. And like the basic idea about Gnosticism is very, very interesting. So at the basic story, they were taking a lot of stories from the Bible, for example, Adam and Eve and paradise. And they said that basically they asked themselves, okay, if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and good and all these different things, why is the world so imperfect? Like, how could make a perfect being an imperfect world? So their idea was that not God created the world, but like a lesser, like demon, the demiurge. And so then the story of Adam and Eve transforms because they are unconscious in paradise, right? And the snake is not expelling them from the ideal state, but rather expelling them from a state of not knowing, right? So they eat from the apple that brings them the wisdom of good and evil and the knowledge of good and evil. And this was a good thing because this is the beginning of consciousness.
And it's knowledge.
Yes, and it's then knowledge. And you have it very much, for example, in the movie Matrix, where you have Neo. And Neo, he just feels that there's something wrong with the world. And he tries to find out. So he goes out and scours the internet and tries to find out in the world. And then, like Trinity, interesting, his Anima, and also Lawrence Fishburne, Morpheus, his self, are finding him and trying to pull him into the real world, which is traumatic for people like Cypher. It's traumatic for everyone, but like Cypher, he wants to go back. He wants to go in this unconscious state, but Neo really embraces it. And this is, by the way, how you can find Gnostic stories when people realize that the world is not really that. What it seems like. In that sense, also the Barbie movie is a little bit of a Gnostic movie. But those were really popular in the 90s, like Dark City and so on, or Pleasantville. So this is Gnosis. Gnosis starts with this feeling that there's something not quite right, and you're trying to find out what it is. And I think this is the universal human feeling, and Jung is describing that. And it's not that it stopped with Jung, but still people have it. And this is why the stories speak to us.
And I guess the Jung would be the red pill in that sense, where it's like, go out, break out of the matrix, actually understand the real world.
Yeah.
Whereas the alternative to that, I wonder what the alternative is. Stay in the dream, stay like traditional Christianity that was basically the enemy of Gnosticism for a while, that said Gnosticism is some kind of heresy. What would they say to this?
Well, the problem is when you have Catholicism, not that there's anything wrong with Catholicism. It's existing for over 2,000 years, and it's very, very successful and also brought a lot of good things. But the basic idea is that you cannot have individual or personal revelations. So you have certain people that have revelations, and they're heretics. And when they're very lucky, they become saints afterwards because maybe really God spoke to him and it's not the devil. Everything else is the devil. Your dreams are the devil, and voices that you hear are the devil, and all these different things. So you don't have a personal relationship with God, but rather it's the relationship is through the church. Like the Pope is speaking to God, otherwise no one. And like it makes sense that Protestantism developed out of that, because it says, no, well, actually you can speak to God directly. It does not need these intermediate structures. But at the same time, you have one Catholic Church, and if you look at the Protestant decision, you not decision, but like section of religion, you have many, many, many denominations, and also new ones are coming up based on this idea that you can talk to God basically directly. It becomes more like a personal church. But at the same time, like all the work of the church is then on your shoulders. So it's also a complex relationship that's then existing there. So yeah, this is why the Catholic Church then of course tried to suppress the Gnosticism and destroyed there a lot of works. Interestingly enough, available are very much the criticisms of the Catholic Church about Gnosticism. This is where we know large parts of it because they wrote down what they do not like about it.
Interesting. I wonder what the Catholic Church kind of proposes for the Adam and Eve kind of story, where you get expelled from paradise, you have knowledge, you have consciousness now, and for Jung that would be like, great, now you're in the real world. For the Catholic Church, it seems like a problem, and so I wonder what the implications are. Like Jung would say, yeah, okay, you're out of paradise, that's good, stay there, stay in the real world. Does the Catholic Church say something like, go back to paradise?
Well, basically that's like promise that is there, right? You're living in this corrupted, dying world, like people in the past, like Abraham, they lived 800 years, and today people live only 80 years, and back then even shorter, like in the Middle Ages. So it was seen as a kind of decline of the world, like a dying world. And at a certain point, it would kind of reset through the apocalypse. And then people would go to paradise, like also when you are like heaven, into an ideal world. So you work and you toil in the world which is now to have a good afterlife. Of course, like the Protestant view, again, is then very different. It's saying, okay, maybe we will make things nice while we're still here. So it's then again a more view and direction towards the world as it is right here. So again, then you find that certain logical conclusions that come from there. So one very interesting statistic that I heard from a long time ago, Germany had this thing happening, which was the 30-year war. So when Protestantism emerged with all the other denominations, there was a huge war in Germany that took quite a long time, almost 30 years. And they basically stopped it by saying, okay, now just the Protestants can go to the Protestants and the Catholics go to the Catholics. So you have this chessboard-like pattern through Germany. And in the statistics, they tried to find out how the earnings potential was from these different like says enclaves of Protestants, pure Protestants or pure Catholics. And they found out that there was statistically significant a small increase in earnings when people were living in Protestant areas. So it's like, oh, this happened hundreds of years ago. It was a very interesting study. So yeah, it has to do with worldview. What do you make out of the world? And you can have kind of both in your psyche. Jung says that's not only one thing, but you have many, many different views of the world inside of you. It's just you're kind of born and start out with one thing, similar when you have a card game, right? You start with a hand of cards, but it doesn't mean the hand of cards is the whole game. The deck with everything, all the cards, this is the game. So you're kind of drawing cards and revealing parts of your psyche and trying to integrate it. And this is where you then have to go, okay, well, what is the direction that's like missing? What is the stuff that is I'm weak at? And this is the direction where Jung would try to point people, to make them aware of certain things, right? To give them the red pill or some insights into themselves, or help them develop that for themselves, that they can find that out, that, oh, I'm like this. Oh, this is why I was angry. Oh, this is why I'm sad. And this is a very, really interesting approach to say that you can heal people with that. Because this is what came up back then, the talking cure, championed by Freud. This idea to say there's a person that has even physical ailments. They're low energy, things might hurt, and all these different things, and you talk with them and suddenly it disappears. And this was back then revolutionary. The idea back then, before, was more when you have psychological problems, your brain is damaged. So you have just a damaged brain, there's nothing you can do with the people, so you just lock them up and wait till they die. So conditions, horrible. And Jung did not really believe in that. So in his studies, he already went to morgues and looked at autopsies and so on to check the brains of people who had also severe psychological problems after they died, of course. And saw that everything looks normal. You could not see it. So his feeling was really that it has not something to do really with the brain physically how it is, but rather it's a thing of attitude, of associations and connections that you make. And psychoanalysis then also proved him right in that regard, that you have the talking cure. Like, and this is working. Otherwise, we would not have things as coaching, right? This is a very basic human thing, to talk through problems and help people to see things differently, to make them healthy. And you feel better when you worked through that. So, very interesting time, very interesting things developed there. So a lot of things we take for granted now started back then. And this is why Jung and Freud and also Adler are mentioned as the forefathers of psychology and this branch of, let's say, human investigation.
Did you have a feeling that Jung actually brings his own spiritual framework into his work as well? Because we talked about Christianity a little bit. Yes. I wonder if he even identified as a Christian. I don't even know. Is it also important for him that you have some kind of spiritual, direction or goal in life, and this kind of side of the personality? Is it important for him to develop that?
Interestingly enough, when you read his whole works, because he's the earliest thing you can read is from his studies. There were some lectures he gave in Sofingia, which is a kind of students club where they were debating, and also his PhD thesis up to the point where he died. And he has views that shifted a little bit. So in the beginning, early Jung, thank you, he was a kind of mythbuster. So he looked at a lot of things and he said, well, actually, it's the unconscious. Right. So he would look into, for example, his PhD thesis was about his niece, and he was a medium. So seances were very popular back then. Seances? Yes. What is that? Well, it's when you talk to spirits. Oh. This is when you have this Ouija board. Mm-hmm. The pronunciation I always get wrong. But it's like, the spirits are communicating and they're talking through people. This was very popular. So people would meet in a dark room and talk to spirits and so on. Yeah. This is what he would do on a Friday night. And he would then look at that and say, like, well, you can feel that she's like moving the table. The table is not moving by itself, but she's moving it, but she's not aware of that. She's moving it unconsciously. And he would look at a lot of things like that. For example, he visited a friend and he just bought a new house in the countryside, and he would stay there over the weekend. And the first night he stayed in his own room there. Suddenly he saw the face of a dead woman with a half-dead face right in front of him while he was falling asleep. So he the next morning came, of course, to his host, and the host asked him, okay, how did you sleep? And Jung said, well, I had this very weird experience and vision. And the host said, yeah, that happens to everyone. Like, I really wanted to test it with you because every guest that I put in this room, they see some kind of dead lady. And nobody knows why. So Jung, being a scientist, started to investigate in the village close by. And he, through some work, could find out that actually there's someone died in that room. And this happened before his friend bought the house. So his idea was maybe there's still like blood in the carpet or like particles of this dead person. And he breathes it in. And when you go to sleep, your consciousness goes like lower and lower and it opens up to a lot of more things. So this is why his unconscious is giving them this image of the dead woman. So he said like, that's not a ghost. Like really a person died here and you like breathed in the particles. And this is how he tried to explain a lot of things, a lot of parts of human experiences. But the older he got, he became a little bit more spiritual and mystical because he said, there's some really weird coincidences going on. And it's not completely explainable only through the unconscious. And also the unconscious has a lot of more life and autonomy in it than you might expect. So he says, you have to develop it yourself in the way that you live your life and you become a person developing in your interest and your personality through time. You kind of develop this system of symbols and convictions and experiences that are very deeply meaningful to you. It's a little bit like a mini religion that you do for yourself. That happens then quite naturally. So it's not about that you can just take something, let's say, and say, I take Christianity or I take Buddhism, and I just read all the books, let's say, and then I follow that. I believe this now. And he said, very likely this does not completely work because you have a background, you have your own psychological background, you have a cultural background, and there's a lot of presuppositions in there. And it needs to be something that you can connect to, and you very much connect to your own personal experiences. And so it's having it from above is very on the conscious side. It's then really, I force myself to believe that. I have to believe that. And the other thing kind of grows organically from below, like a plant. So if you pay attention and if you live your life and when you confront your shadow, you kind of build this inside of you as a byproduct, let's say.
I want to move back to this topic of connecting with people through your shadow. And you talked about how it's helpful to do that when you put work out. Jung kind of didn't really want to share those red books, but it helped him a lot posthumously. And I put these rather dark topics out, and it seems to be the topics that resonate the most. But then also, you don't want to overwhelm people with those kind of very dark emotional things. In a way, it seems like for personal relationships, when it's not about public work, but actually talking to people, making friends, it's really important to show those vulnerable sides. You had that experience as well when you talked about these very difficult moments in your life. You got a lot of support and you kind of strengthened your connection, right? How do you find the balance there? And for my viewers especially, one thing that's really important to them is talking to people that they just kind of met in real life, and maybe there's even like an attraction and you want to really kind of get to know that person, build a relationship. How do you find the balance of not sharing too much, but also sharing enough to build that trust that, here we can share the most intimate stuff?
I think that there's two important components to that. One is really, how do you feel when you share their difficult things? And let's say it's successful when you feel relieved afterwards. And the other thing is you have to kind of watch the other person. So the other person, as you said, they can be overwhelmed. They could even be bored. Like they could also not care. It really then depends on the person. So I think the problem that is there when you talk about very personal things and very raw things, you're missing the experience for that. You're missing the skill for that. So very likely you will be bumbling, you will be incredibly nervous, and it kind of has to get out at least once. So I think the important part is just repetition. And I can completely understand when people do it with the wrong person, for example, and they put something out that's very personal and they get not supportive feedback because the person doesn't know how to do it, or they don't care, or they even think it's funny. Like it's then very, very tough. And that's also what I heard from other people when they struggled, that they often had no one really to talk to, because they felt that no one would like really listen. And this is, of course, an absolutely horrible situation to be in. And it takes time to build trust and to get to know someone so well that you can then open you up like that. So I would not recommend it with strangers, even though there's some interesting meetups in Berlin where it's really about, okay, you have a perfect stranger and you just tell them something incredibly personal because you know you will never see them again.
That's the thing. You have nothing to lose.
This is then again an interesting approach. But yeah, I think you have to be kind of careful, like how you lay out certain information. At what point, especially when you're, let's say, romantically interested in a person, you don't want to shy them away. I think it's pretty clear everybody has some kind of baggage or things that are weird about them, and of course everybody wants to put their best foot forward. But yeah, at a certain time, it's necessary if you want to have really a valuable relationship with someone that you open yourself up. And you talk then also about the deeper things. And
I think that shows a lot of confidence when you can actually talk about those things. Yes. And it proves that you have confronted those shadows. Yes. If you can talk about it and not feel extremely miserable or feel like, oh, I need you now to, affirm me or help me. No, it's just a thing. It's a problem in my life and I'm dealing with it. And so I can talk about it. So I tell my clients, when I work with someone intensively, you have nothing to lose from a stranger. Their judgment really doesn't matter for your life. You're never gonna, in a big city, you're never gonna meet them again. Yeah. And so why not share something deeply personal, and maybe not the most intense version, not the longest version, because yes, some people don't care, right? But like a hint of it. And then sometimes it resonates, just the way that, online content sometimes resonates when it's dark, because a lot of people have those dark sides. Mm-hmm. I feel like those dark sides, when you meet someone, often you find that the other person also has something like that, right? So for example, me, I talk about my beard kind of having these gaps here. That's one of my shadows, right? Oh, really? It's one of my things that I really don't like about myself and very conscious of it. But
it looks cool. It looks like a lot of effort, actually.
I made a reel recently where I said, this is my way of dealing with it. I make it look intentional, as if it was a choice. And sometimes I shave this part off, so it's just the sideburns. Yes. But actually, I can't grow beard here, right? So when I meet someone and the topic somehow comes up, I like to just say that. I'm like, yeah, I actually can't grow a full beard. It's a bit painful to say that as a man, especially as a man who wants to attract a woman in that case, for example. But it's cool because then the other person, often they share one of their insecurities with their body, and everyone has that. So it builds an immediate connection like that. So I found that the faster you open up about these shadow topics, the faster you can actually build a connection with a stranger.
Yeah, and this is why Jung said it's important to integrate the shadow, and you can kind of see it also in persons when they confronted the shadow, and it's also part of them. If you're, let's say, you're only clean, you're only perfect, there's no wrinkles, there's no shadow on your face, it means you're not actually completely human. I think it tips something off in us. There's like, everything's a little bit too curated, too perfect, and I think this can put people off. Because I think when you then start comparing yourself to that, it's like, I'm interacting with this God, basically. It's like you feel very, very human. But if they bring themselves down, let's say, it's then you're meeting on a more equal footing. So it's an interesting thing. Like without a shadow, things are flat. And even you as a person, you would be very flat. But when you have a shadow, you become 3D. You suddenly have depth, right? We already use these words in our language to describe that, and you have it with that. When you're somewhere in a really, let's say, strange situation you have never been before, and you're there with someone who's very competent, they're very often very calm because they know what is happening. They might be even a little bit annoyed, and this is then showing that they've kind of been there, right? And this also puts people at calm, right? If you freak out and the other person freaks out, it's like, what do we do now? But if there's someone who can be calm, that's already pretty helpful to also self-regulate.
I have a feeling that might also be the reason that tattoos are popular and that tattoos are often dark. I mean, first of all, they're mostly black and they're often very dark. The tattoos that you see, skulls all the time. It's usually a lot of shadowy stuff for me.
Yeah, that's true.
And I feel like it's kind of a way to show, hey, look, I'm not scared to show my dark sides. And often the people, when you talk to them, they're just normal. Like there's nothing super dark about it. But they display that. And I think there's even a study made that people online, when they show their tattoos on dating apps, have more success.
Oh, really?
It seems to be kind of universally, objectively, in some way attractive. And maybe it's a way of integrating your shadow.
Well, it's a very good conversation starter.
That's true, yeah.
I would say it tells you something about the person, and it's then very interesting to look at it symbolically. So Jung talks a lot about symbols, things that have a meaning. For example, the Christian cross has a meaning. The swastika has a meaning. A mermaid has a meaning, like what it represents psychologically. And if people say there's something that's personally I'm connected with, that's already kind of integration. You kind of integrate it into your body. So it's already kind of symbolic act to bring that and let it be part of you and being something then very permanent. But yeah, you're right. Like sunshine and roses. Well, you have sometimes roses as tattoos, but mostly it goes in the dark direction that you have snakes and wolves and stuff like
roses
that.
Also have the spikes.
If they are there, then they have spikes. Yeah, that's true.
There's this general theme that you also touched upon in one of your podcasts where you said confident people often have a certain naivety about them where they're not fully conscious and they even need to be a little bit unconscious to be able to just say, this is great. Yeah. This is the best piece of art. And look at this. Like, if you are too conscious and you think too much about all these things, you tend to just get some doubts and you tend to not be super sure about things. You can't say anything for sure anymore, right? Yeah. So I wonder if consciousness and confidence, maybe there's a tension there. Can you be extremely confident and at the same time extremely conscious? Because my name on Instagram is Conscious Confidence and even on my YouTube channel.
That's a very good question. Jung sees their shadow also a little bit as doubt, that you say, okay, you're not perfect, let's say. But the problem is also you can have way too much of that. Then you think way too much about yourself in a negative way, and you are very unsure about yourself. That's also living in the shadow. Of course, it can be, let's say, helpful when you're just very confident and you're just straightforward and you just do without thinking, let's say, and without reflection. You can achieve there a lot of things. The question is, how long does it actually work? And I think people also can feel it. What was it about? Like, if you want to be a good leader, you have to have this aura of infallibility while learning and second guessing about yourself constantly. So I think it's more helpful to build this confidence on the experiences that you made and the life that you lived, and how you observed yourself than just to very blindly do things. But this can be also very successful. Jung said a lot of artists actually don't have a shadow. They just do. Wow. They do not question themselves. And things might even fall apart if they would question themselves, because it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out. But it's not something that Jung, let's say, would recommend. But yeah, this is how some people are living their lives.
I look outside the window and oftentimes I see these really cool kids and they don't seem to have a doubt. They don't seem to have a deeper thought, right?
Oh, yeah.
They just seem to go and just get drunk and have fun. And they come across as very confident to me in some way, but not very conscious.
Yeah, no, that's true. And there were some people in school, like in school, when you're a pupil, you haven't done anything yet, right? Yeah. You have not really experienced something. And there are some people who are really, really confident. And like, where is this coming from? Like, I know you from school. There's no reason to be that confident. I don't believe that you do a lot of stuff outside of school. Right. So that would warrant this kind of confidence. But yeah, I think you hit there then certain limits. You will be then limited in your life in a certain way. And this is where you have to then go down. So you kind of, your psyche tries to pull you to the middle. If you're too confident, it tries to kick you down. But if you're also too low, let's say, in your confidence, it tries to find ways to bring you up again.
Yeah. One thing that I work a lot with people on is building confidence when they come from a different culture. Yeah. And I think when you come from a different culture, you're quite forced to think. Yes. Because you look around and the world doesn't work the way you used to. It's like Jung says, I think the best way to become conscious is to hit your head. And people who come to a different culture, they hit their head. Yeah. The symbols that they're used to, right? All the cultural narratives are not known. And so I think those people have it a bit harder because they don't have that option of just saying, oh, I'll just do whatever everyone else does and everything will just work out for me. Have you experienced that? And how do you see Jungian mechanisms work for people across cultures who are not from the Western context at all, who might not even relate to also the stories that Jung talks about all the time?
So Jung talked a lot about psychology in different ways, and this is personal psychology, but also this collective psychology. And he says, well, a culture also has a psychology, right? Cultures are different; they have a different focus. You can even see it when people are waiting for the bus, right? How far apart are they standing? And you can map it on how far away from the equator they are. The closer you're to the equator, the closer they're standing. The farther away you are, the farther they are standing from each other. So these are very unconscious things and like rules and social norms that you, of course, take with yourself into another place that works differently. So you become aware. It's like you're a fish and you become aware of the water that you're in and you're, let's say, suddenly missing. That is tough. But it's also something that kind of always happened in history. Like people traveled the world and they ended up in different places and they found a way to how to accommodate. But it is then really that there's like a new need that comes up. So it becomes then a very personal journey and this very personal investigation into one, but because you become very aware how you are, how you behave unconsciously, right? Like even you talk about dating, right? When you have people from different cultures trying to date, there's a kind of rituals and cultures there that are then kind of missing. Or let's say the common background and understanding. So you have to say negotiate a little bit more to make like, okay, this is like how I understand attraction and how I understand a relationship, and then also how does the other person see that. So this would already all be implied within the same culture, but if it's different cultures, it becomes then more open and people become more aware of that. But I think now we're in a place where people are very let's say, aware of like just cultural differences that opens them up a lot. And I remember in university, we also talked about psychology and business. And there we talked about that you have the US, they're hyper individualistic, right? And then you have Japan and they are very collectivistic and so on. And I've been to the US and I've been to Japan and to spend a lot of time with Chinese persons. I would not say that they're completely psychologically different. Like you have some other like customs, you pay, you work differently, you communicate differently, all these different things. And there are cultures that you find easier access to than others. But all in all, everybody like tries to be friendly, at least when you come as a tourist. And there's a way that I think these things can be then negotiated, as long as it's not too much of a difference. And it also needs kind of both sides. But I think if you come to a different country, it can be kind of a shock. But I think it's this shock that can really let you grow. And then again, explore psychological things about yourself that you have within yourself. Because Jung says we have all the possibilities within us, right? The whole deck of cards. And it's then really based on the situation that you're in, that you need to pull certain cards. They come up all by themselves. He even says he had some experiences with his patients that they would dream differently when they're in a different place. So this is this very interesting psychological experience. So it makes sense to travel. It makes sense to be somewhere else because you can learn a lot about yourself.
And I guess when you go deep into yourself as an expat, you discover the deeper connection between all humans, because you discover those universal archetypes, maybe you would call them, or collective unconscious that is shared across all of humanity. And that could be probably a very unifying thing as well, right? When you look at those deeper collectively unconscious things, and you realize that transcends culture. That is what connects a German and an Indian immediately. Whereas maybe on the surface, on the conscious level, we think we're so different. So that is also maybe another argument for the post-migrant society, for people who travel and live in different places where they grew up, to look more at their shadow, because the shadow is kind of what connects humans.
Yeah, this is also what he says about, like, we connect to each other also through our shadow, our inferior side, where we are not strong. So he says this is also like a source of attraction. Like, a person can be very attractive to you because they have something that you're lacking. So as a kind of fulfillment of a psychological need. At the same time, you have to be kind of very aware of that, because the other person is not there to, let's say, satisfy your psychological needs. But there's a reason why you are drawn to something, or why you're repulsed by certain things. It is when you talk to a stranger on the street, you first experience yourself. You experience your own emotions and thoughts and ideas coming up, right? It's not necessarily coming from that person. It's your psychological reaction to the person. So in that sense, it's about you. And when you see yourself then drawn to certain people or being repulsed, that's always a source of investigation. And that is very nice idea that it's like, oh yeah, we have a masculine side and a feminine side, or like all of us, but like men are more on the masculine side, women are more on the feminine side. But when they get into a relationship, they kind of can help each other out with their respective side, because each person is then lacking in that.
People from different cultures, I guess, also have another problem, which is they are a bit more scared of the consequences of breaking rules, because they don't even know those rules.
Yes.
They don't also know the penalties of the rules. Like, you know, when you make a mistake in football and you just foul someone, it's not such a big deal, right? Okay, they get a free kick. But if you don't know what's going to happen, you play it way too safe. And then you, again, come across as not very relatable and authentic, because you're just hiding and trying to keep everything behind the barrier so that nothing can go out of control. I guess that's also one thing that I tend to tell my clients. They probably need to study the rules and observe really well for a while, and then go out there and make those mistakes and learn like everyone else.
Or in a similar way in what you talked about, and also regarding your beard, just saying, okay, I'm here, I have no clue what's going on. Can someone please explain me what's going on?
That's also a vulnerability. Yeah, you can share it, right?
Then open up to that. And I think a lot of people can sympathize with that. But yeah, this idea of you have no idea what the rules are. It's fun to see when you work in a company and there's new people joining and you're already there for a long time, and they're like, they don't know the people, they don't know the processes, they don't know all the unwritten rules. And of course, with some time, they ease into that, and then they understand it. And this is also then the point where they become more confident. So like the most confident people are the people that are already there for 10, 20 years.
One last topic I wanted to touch on, because we brought up anima and animus, feminine, masculine. In how far do you feel is Jung compatible with modern views on a gender? Because that's a very hot topic, and even saying like certain things are more feminine than others is not very much in the zeitgeist today. So do you see there some tension?
Well, I would say it's very much in the zeitgeist in the question, like what is male, what is female. His ideas are really about masculinity and femininity as it's represented in culture and in art and so on. So it does not mean male and female. It means just certain ways of, let's say, interacting in the world. So it's kind of nice thought to think about that, to say, okay, you kind of don't act out a personal way how you are, but rather you're acting out like a basic fundamental cosmic principle. As a man, you act out the masculine principle, and as a woman, you act out the feminine principle. And that this idea, he says, about combining and separating. So there are things that separate and there are things that combine. And this sounds very, very abstract. But you kind of need both in your life. So he says like the logos, the masculine principle is then very often symbolized by a sword, right? And in the eros, the combining principle is then in a cup, because you hold things together. And you have this interplay of both, and it cannot only be one thing. Like as a person, you're not really well-rounded if you're only masculine or only feminine. Right, we want to see the masculine tough guy learning about his caring, soft, connecting side. Not they are a lone wolf in the beginning of the story, and then they're a family man. So we love this story. Like everyone, you have Dwayne The Rock Johnson, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, you have all those guys who get an enormous amount of money to take care of a small child, and people go to the cinema to see that, right? So it is then that really about developing there psychologically, and this representation of something that is fundamentally psychological and even deeper, like what is than humanity. And the talk today, I think Jung would not be surprised about it, because he says these are just, let's say, forces that come up all by themselves. And of course, people are then temperamentally more on a masculine side or on a feminine side. But the important factor then again is there to realize that you're not only that, but you also need to go in the other direction. This is always the important thing to understand. Like how you are right now is kind of a starting point, and you can look then in the other places to find there more. Right? If you're then the tough guy, you should be more caring, more building on relationships, right? Because if you only, for example, invest into business and your career and all these things, and you're very targeted and you cut through all the bullshit and you are hyper-focused on one thing, then you leave out a lot of your life, right? You lose close relationships, and you will suffer for that psychologically. That will work for some time, but at a certain point, your psyche just comes up and it's like, yeah, you're kind of really alone, right? And also in the other side, if you're just completely entangled in everything and you don't have a focus, and you're just jumping around everywhere, then you also don't have really a fulfilled life, right? So if it's only one thing, it's not good. It has to be everything. It cannot be everything at once. You have to be this, you have to be that, from moment to moment. And I have a very nice example that I heard about it. And it has to do like how Jung understands symbols and how we also act them out. It's not only pictures that we bring on our skin, but also patterns that we act out in our daily life. So when you have a holiday, like what is a holiday? A holiday is a time when the family comes together. It doesn't matter where people then are. They can be all over the world. Like for the holidays, you're home. So you're meeting there in a single place. You're coming from everywhere. And what you're doing there, you eat together. So you have the food that's also collected from somewhere, and it's then separated from the bad stuff, from the skin and all these other things, and you mix it together, and then you separate it out again. And so it's this, everybody eats it, everybody shares the same food, so they grow out of the same material that is shared, and then they disperse again. Like a holiday is not only the coming together, but it's also the dispersing again. So you have this separating and combining on many, many, many different levels happening at the same time. And you have to do it then very consciously and willfully, that you keep only the good things and put the bad things out. Like you don't cook the peels, but you cook then the meat, and not necessarily the bones. It really depends on the dish, of course, but you take purposeful things to say, okay, I'm separating out, and now I'm combining again, and separating out, I'm combining again. And this is this masculine and feminine then interacting and interplaying through symbolic acts. And this is a very nice to think about when it's like, I'm a man, and like my purpose in a sense is to act out this masculine principle, which is not only, let's say, something that was invented in an Instagram reel or in a book or whatever, but rather is something that's been existing for 10,000s of years or millions of years, and goes even deeper and beyond human beings. And to meet them on say like, okay, we have these two cosmic principles coming together and then creating something new. This is then a very nice view to look at it. It's not only about how men are like this and women are like this, but like it's really about distilling there something and creating something new. And this is then also Jung. And when I read this, I'm like, oh yeah, this is actually a nice way to think about it.
Incredibly complex, but it seems like you said earlier, the world is messy. So the theory to approach the world needs to be also in some way messy and complex and multi-layered and gradual, right? No absolute borders, really. It's all a matter of measure. If people need more help navigating this very complex world of psychological literature, how can they actually get in touch with you? How can they learn more about these topics from you?
My meetup group, it's called CG Jung Helpdesk, and you can find it there. It's now pretty big. It has 2,800 members worldwide. And I've done roughly 100 events.
And these are online events, right?
Yes, online and also offline events.
Oh, yeah.
So people can connect there. So I also have there like a WhatsApp number or telephone number, and also email. And people reach out to then like say thanks for the things that I put out there. So yeah, people can stop by there, say hello, ask a question, bring a story. People tell there really a lot of stories, also a lot of personal stories. They put themselves out there, which is really beautiful to experience. And so I have then the podcasts that are the recordings. If people are more interested in specific topics, I talk there about a lot of things like dream interpretation or alchemy, or also creativity or rationality. So that would be a way.
Great. Thanks a lot for doing all that work, Marcus. Really great to have you here, and all the best going forward.